around what it means from a workplace, right? So now I'm going to add on this additional layer that says, what do I need to pay attention to if I'm going to be coaching in a workplace environment, or if I'm a leader in a workplace environment? How complex does it get? So I'm going to share a screen and kick this off. So I want to share with it's applying a transformative framework, which means you're going to get the tools, but how you translate that and apply that is up to you. So what I'm going to do is set a frame. That's exactly what it is. And at CMA, we teach frames. And so the frame and how you integrate it, how you translate it in a workplace, depending on the culture, the size, and the people in the company will vary. So there's not one size that fits all. All right, let's start here. There are two things we're going to talk about right off the bat. The first thing is, well, what makes the workplace different? So how does this feel and show up different from the one-to-one engagements that we've had? What are the things we need to pay attention to? And then the second thing is just a little recap around what does transformative conversation look like and feel like? So you will have your own interpretations of both sides. What I'm going to share today is my understanding based on my 20 plus years in corporate, but also this great journey of coaching, how now it's blending together. So what I'm going to set as a frame, and you can go around doing the same exercise, and that's what I'm going to teach you today and really go through, is for you to explore this framework and then translate what it means for you. So let's start with this. And I'm just going to shout out, right, guys, what do you think makes the workplace a unique environment from individual coaching? So you could type it in the chat, you could shout it out. What makes it different? How does it feel different? How does it show up different? Workplace boundaries, great, fantastic. Yes, love that. So there exists this concept of teams and boundaries, right? So we're recognizing that there's more than one entity at play. Awesome. Culture, yes. So the culture is not just me alone as a culture, it's the culture of an organization together. Oh, you guys have so many brain juices. I'm catching up. Group of people. All right, that's critical, right? So it's more than one at play. If you're full-time coaching for a peer, it could be junior executive, yes. So if you're full-time coaching, how are you embedded? What is your relationship with these people? Are you aware? Different professional profile leaders, yes. We need to be aware of the different people that exist, either in seniority, title, or even in influence, right? So this is at play as well. Trust in the organization, great. Goals, okay, goals is a good one. Highly competitive, emotions are hidden. Values, different values, awesome. Different mindsets, behaviors, awesome, well done. So in summary, what we're trying to get to here is that actually, as a coach now, I need to be aware of, and what I'm calling this is a system. So what you guys are kind of talking about now is, there's a system at play here with more than one person, and how one person interacts, these are like little atoms, right? Is that they actually impact the people beside them. And what mindset they hold, what behaviors, what understanding, what culture are all different. So this is the ecosystem that is very unique in a workplace versus individual coaching. So now we need to know that this exists. All right, now what? Well, there's a few ways that you can carve the existence of this. For me, I see it as business outcomes as a group and then behaviors. Some people will talk about process, people, tools. But just know that in an organization, there are quite structured ways that you want to be looking at how a system of an organization exists. I also want to add that you guys called out some really great things about it's not just the one person that exists. When we coach now, we've got great. we know this lens, and in CMA, it's very much about the individual, the who, me, myself, and I. The interesting thing about being a coach in the workplace is there's other lenses we now need to consider is, what about me and my team? That exists now, right? This correlation. Oh, there's one more. What about me, my team, and my organization? So this is what it's at play, right? And that left bubble that I talked about that exists as part of workplace coaching is now this whole ecosystem of the lenses that we take that are now additional and new. So I'm just going to hold this right here, right now, and pause and say that's where I showed the two bubbles, right? There is one bubble on, all right, let's recognize in an organization what's different and what's unique, because that's important. Now, the next piece we'll talk about is, what do you guys know as coaches? What does it mean to bring forward transformation? Right, so let's talk about that separately, and then what we'll do is bring this together. I'm just going to pause here. Any questions, any thoughts up to this point? Making sense? All right, cool. All right, so the next piece here, so I'm going to show them as parts, and then we'll bring them together. The next piece is, okay, cool. What makes then for a transformative conversation? Now I'm gonna just, again, same exercise, just throw in the chat or shout it out or put in the chat. What defines, in your mind, a transformative conversation? What's the characteristic? What does it mean? Awareness, clarity, choice. Yes, you have the framework. Change, I like that, change. Co-creation, great. Shift in some sort. Yes, sustainable change. Sustainable is the key one. Understanding, learning from point A to point B, great. Intrinsic change, motivation, new insights. Awesome. Insights, yes. Great. Transformative mindset. Yeah, so what we want to do is create that, taking risk. Okay. One that helps the client see themselves and elevate learning about themselves that promotes change. Good. So I'm hearing very similar themes. How you guys define it, just keep that as well. But what this is designed to do, this session, is really that there's so many frames available. Trust, excellence, learning about the gaps. Great. And I will cover all of this. So for me, having been in corporations and what I prioritize. So again, you as a coach have the ability now to prioritize how you want to focus that change, right? We're offering you the buffet, but how you work with the organization, how you work with the leaders in the organization is really a choice discussion on what the organization needs. So for me, I'm giving my lens, right? And for me, it starts with always directing the mind towards what's positive possible. Does this sound familiar? Yes, right? The principle still holds true, whether it's individual coaching or team coaching or executive coaching. So that's what our principles really are, right? So for me, if I'm coaching in an executive environment, a team environment, this is one of the things that I'm always holding true to, right? For me, these are my anchors in creating transformation. I have 4. So the second one is really uncovering the gaps together. So uncovering gap is one of the checkpoints in the CMA framework. That's more individual. The key here is together, right? So in organizations, there's a service to the individual, there's a service to the team, but there's a service to the organization. And that's where this 3 lens you always need to be keeping top of mind. And so any of the questions, the facilitation, the conversation needs to be driving with this in mind. The next one is really creating generative learning moments. And this is, again, one of our checkpoints, right? Is learning. And so same thing, but we want it to be generative within. So same thing. For the individual, what about a team? How do teams create generative learning? How does an organization then do this as a result of that. And the last piece for me, and that's critically important, and some of you guys called this out, is talk about stickiness and accountability. So our fifth checkpoint that we talk about in our CAMA framework, right? But it's not just a one-off. What do we want it in an organization and teams is how it sticks. And that's the additional lens that we're throwing in here. So I'm going to take a pause here now and just say that, all right, now that we have the two pieces, what makes organizations unique, recognizing that, and what's transformation, conversation. And now we're going to bring them together. I'm going to pause here. Any questions, comments so far? Making sense? Not making sense? Lots of smiles. So I'm going to take it as making sense. But again, how you translate this is completely up to you. So stickiness is how it can continue when you as a coach step away. How can the organization create that behavior, that learned behavior by themselves? And I know it's fantastic, right? Our sell point as a coach is more work, right? Continued work. But fundamentally, this is why we say generative change in our clients, right? Is that we want sustainable change in our clients so that they can actually learn in themselves. But now the lens now here is, how do you do it in an organization? How do you make it stick? And that's the extended piece that's really a little bit more different, because you want that stickiness between each other. So if you as a coach or as a leader walk away, your teams, your organizations, they're still sticking and holding true to it. That stickiness. Does that answer your question, Lex Smokant?
Yeah.
Great. And Laura.
Thank you so
much.
Yep,
you're welcome. Laura, what do you mean by generative learning moments? Okay. Have you done the core, Laura? Our core CMA course yet? Doing it. Okay, awesome. So maybe I'm spilling some of the beans early, but the generative learning moment is that instead of saying what you've learned, it's how can you recreate that learning? I will talk about this afterwards as well, about how we create generative. And that's where it's a little more advanced. So I encourage you, if this is interesting, there's the advanced piece where we talk about second and third learning loops. I will have some examples at the very end that will illustrate this so that you can get a feel of what it is. Thank you. Rajesh has one. Executive coaching and team coaching in corporations are different, is it not? Well, I would ask, is executives are more than one person? What's at play, right? Who's on the table that you're coaching? So executive coaching is usually one-to-one, and team coaching is usually many. So that's where in corporations, there are different types of coaching modalities that are at play. And what I'm talking about today can address both. How you apply it is up to you. But they are different. Executive and team coaching they are designed differently. So what I'm going to offer now, and keep throwing in the questions, I will catch them. Thank you, Ben, for calling that out, is this next piece now about bringing it together. So the challenge to you now, as people who are interested in executive coaching, interested in corporate coaching or coaching in a corporate environment, is now that you can bring the two together, how does it show up for you as a coach? And I will use a case study to illustrate how this shows up for me. But my challenge to you is really think about, now that you know what exists as corporations, what I need to pay attention to, what do I want to drive in transformation, how they come together, and how you show up in a corporate environment as a leader or in executive coaching. The one thing that I want to bring all this together is, well, how do you know that I'm doing it right? How do we know as a team, as an organization, that we're doing it right? And so for me, being in corporation, I'm still in corporate, is that there's always this term of ROI, return on investment. How do we know we're getting bang for our money? Yes, measurement, metric, absolutely. So in individual coaching, We have that competency that exists. But what about in teams, in organizations? So for me personally, what I measure, and again, how you want to define how you do it right is a conversation that you need to explore with your sponsor, with your teams. But what I'm giving you is this question needs to be asked and then properly answered, right? So how do I know I'm doing it right? Well, for me, one of the key things culturally in my organization is first that there's transparent sharing and that they're sharing across teams. And we're able to come to the table to talk about the challenges and how we need to move forward. So this is at this stage of my organization. But again, the organization that you're working with, the teams that you're working with, the executives, that is something that you need to have an open discussion about is, well, how do we get this check-in to know that my efforts, your efforts are working? So this is just my example of how I see where my organization is at, but a startup versus an MNC can be very different. But just know that this metric, this measurement of success needs to be part of the discussion. Any questions so far around up to here? Just going to pause a bit. Okay, so what I'm gonna do next, and again, I'm throw it in, it's super casual today and here to really just bounce out what's going on. So this is my challenge to you today, is that I'm not offering you a prescriptive way to go about doing team, executive, corporate coaching in a workplace environment. I'm giving you a frame for you to consider, knowing that this exists. All right, so I know it's a bit of a big slide. Hold on, I'm missing pieces. There we go. But this is just me translating an example in a workplace. And I know that I'll talk through it slowly and you can throw out questions as needed. So this one is really doing a case study of integrating the characteristics of an organization and what I want to deliver as transformative. So remember I talked about the 4 pieces, what's positive and possible, uncovering the gaps together, generative learning moments, and stickiness. So for me, this is important. And this is how I approach an organizational coaching moment in my organization or others. So I'm going to pause here and look at Judy, your question. What are examples of check-ins, measurements in a team environment surveys questionnaires? Okay, Judy, well, let's hold that to the end because that's a really great question. At the end, when I wrap this, I will get back to it, but fantastic question. And I think it's very applicable. And especially we talk about how we want to land this practically for our clients, for our teams, for ourselves. So I work heavily in projects and I can tell you most of the projects in my organization are delayed. So what happens is the thing that I always keep in mind as we go into these moments, these coaching moments, is there's the 3 lenses that need to exist. If I'm working with an individual, what's in it for them? What's in it for the team? What's in it for the organization? So not all the inquiries or thinking is here, but what I'm trying to give you is a flavor that I'm trying to address all 3. All right. So that's the interesting thing to keep in mind. That's very different from one-to-one coaching, is that therein exists the system that we need to be catering to. And some people don't always think about it in that way, but it's our roles to prompt this. So if you're doing executive coaching one-to-one, what you want to add on at the very end is what it means for the team and then what it means for the organization as well, right? That's really playing to corporate workplace environment. All right, so remember I also talked about how you want to break up the lenses. For me, the lens is important. Stickiness is important because behaviors come through stickiness. If you want things to stick, it needs to be at the behavioral level and the business outcomes. So for those who took the core, it's almost like the what and the who, exact same frame. But how we're now translating this to an organization is business outcomes, the what, but then the who are the behaviors that are underneath it that actually anchor the what. So this is how my lens in translating the CMA framework can sit on top of an organization, right? So the what is the business outcome, and the behaviors is the who of the client. So the what and the who. And that's how you can position where the questioning can go and what it's trying to create. So as an example, driving what's positive and possible. The key thing is, and organizations all the time will be like, what happened? What happened is a look in the past or in the future. Yes, past, absolutely. But so often leaders always start with, well, what happened? Right? So what we want to now create, and this is where it's the ability to create together, is this forward focused questioning, thinking. So the idea is to support our leaders, support our teammates, and ask questions like, well, what would we like to have happen? So transformative principle number 1 in our CMA course is really divert it forward. What happened is not helpful in going forward. What happened is diagnosis, right? We're troubleshooting. What our interest now in is the project's delayed. We know that already. But what are now the things that we want to really push forward in? What could we enable to happen? And that's now talking about coming together as capabilities. So all the wording, if you pay attention to how the grammar, it's really to support the organization, the team, the leaders in looking forward. So that principle still holds true. And the one thing is the third bullet, which honestly, a lot of I think organizations do miss, is if we say yes to something, what are we saying no to? And that's where we're helping balance priorities. We're not an unlimited yes game. We have limited resources, both in investments, funding, people, right? And this is where we're working with the business outcomes. And then when we want to move to behaviors, how we want to create the behavior in the people, in our leaders, to be forward thinking is what needs attention to move forward in doing, thinking, feeling, actioning. How does your expertise direct us forward? And that's really then calling forth their leadership to propel the forward. And we're celebrating their expertise. We're celebrating what they offer in an organization. So I'm going to pause here. And again, how you integrate is completely up to you. And that's why I'm saying this is how I've integrated it, what it means for me, coaching in this environment. But for you, it might come across differently, right? The principles might be different and how, but keeping this frame is quite nice, I think. And it's a good pre-work for you to think about as a leader or as someone going into organizational coaching, right? Just have in mind a game plan. And for me, this is usually what I do coming into projects or an environment where I know there's going to be some coaching needed. I'll set up a frame, pre-think through some of the questions about how I want to drive behaviors and business outcomes, and really use that as reference. All right, second piece is uncovering gaps. So doesn't this kind of feel like our framework, right? With how the checkpoints are flowing, very similar. It's actually exactly the same. It's just a lift and shifted into a corporate environment. The second one is really uncovering the gaps together. And what we want to do is, so that black piece under there is, a lot of leaders will say, well, what's missing, right? What did we not do? What did we miss? Is that a loss frame or a gain frame? What's not done, right? Loss, yeah, absolutely. So what we want to be now positioning is, all right, can we position gain gaps instead of loss gaps? All right, what is the bridge forward? Right, so the words that you choose to use, how could we focus on now to get us there? What could we focus now to get there? So it's really in the way you frame. And that's really where the structure, we talk about structure, choice of words, is positioning a gain gap rather than a loss gap. And that's where if you use the wording, people pick up on it, right? So it's setting that frame. Again, the gain and loss frame at play. And then behaviorally, what do we want to create as behaviors to help support that togetherness in uncovering the gap? Is how can we shift gears together to bridge that, to support that, to get there? And what you discover as the business outcomes, insert that into the behavior questions to drive that thinking in the teams, in the leaders. How do we complementarily fit together as a team? What's my or our leadership strengths to get us there? How can we be in service to this? So these are just some thinking, some seed thoughts about driving that behavior in togetherness on the gap piece. Generative learning moments. So this is the next piece that means really important as what's positive possible. Now they know the gaps. How do we generate that second and third learning loop? And that's really about, all right, what are we learning now as a team? What am I learning now about my team? Right? So it's now, as this has happened, we check in what's emerging now. And then the behavior piece around generative learning from is what are you learning about yourself now as a leader? And those are the check-ins that you can do to pulse check second loop. After this has all happened, what are you learning now? What does stepping up as a leader feel like now? How is this different from when we started with the project being delayed? That's the second loop, right? So it's not just what are we learning, it's what is different now about you as a leader from when we started the project or when we started recognizing delay. Something must have changed, and that's what we're trying to create, is that change from behavior, thinking, from when we started project delay. How can you call forth this empowered leader next time? This new leader? That's where it gets interesting. And it takes time for people to really think through it. But I encourage that, honestly, the allocation of time between looking at business outcomes and behaviors is almost 50-50. Although a lot of leaders tend to be 95 business outcomes and 5% behaviors. But what we're going to try and drive at with these questionings around behaviors is really allowing that change in the people, in our teammates, so they can go forward more. And then finally, stickiness and accountability. So stickiness is, how does this change stick in the people, in my people? So if I leave as a leader, if I leave as a coach, they can continue on this journey. And it's really creating self-generated empowerment and energy. When people are energized and empowered in an organization, they will naturally do things on their own, right? So it needs to come from within. So it's, how will we honor this intention? How will we honor it next year? How will we honor it next month? How can showing up for each other be seen? This is a critical question, because if you work in teams, what you want to know is, I'm putting in effort. But I see you are too. And that reciprocation is beautiful. And I think that's what I'm always paying attention to when I'm working with teams and organizations, is this interconnectedness within the people. Not just me as a leader, but it's me and how I'm showing up as a leader for you, for them. I'm going to pause right there to see if there are any questions, how that's landing, any thoughts, like what's landing for you now, and what's going on in your. Any thoughts from anyone? Yeah, Louisa, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, it's amazing how you split it up into the very nice framework, which is kind of it's definitely a model for use. So thank you very much for that, because I think many of us are already students or graduates of Coach Masters Academy, and we know it, but the way you put it in the structure and in the framework is just amazing, and it makes all this so logical. So thank you so much for that, also for giving the examples. That's brilliant. I just wanted to say my gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you, Louisa. Yeah, and actually I empower all of you to say the framework is a frame. The question is how you're translating it, and whatever niche you pick as your niche going forward, it sits on top of that. And this is just how I've translated our framework in a corporate way, in a corporate setting. And you could, again, what you know from your experience is quite unique, right? And that's where your product offering will be unique and different because you're translating it differently. So it's just an example. Absolutely. Thank you, Louisa, for sharing. Judy.
Hey, hi Lisa. I just wanted to ask for the third category for generative learning moment. When you ask the team, what are we learning now as a team? If the responses are negative or in a negative frame, do you adjust that? Because sometimes it's capturing the reality of the situation. Like, do you then switch back to positive frame again? Or can you, like, because the learning process could be negative, right? Like the learning of the situation, right?
All right, so I'm going to answer your question in two parts. The first part is how I go about collecting response. And usually, very often, it's anonymous. If we're doing a group, it's on stickies. Because people usually feel more empowered when they're able to just write something and not have someone else dominate the conversation. So just pay attention to team dynamics. You'll always have someone that speaks the loudest, speaks the most, and usually they're the leaders. But by doing it anonymously on paper, equally, everyone has an equal voice. So that's the first thing in terms of facilitating this type of work. And then the second thing is when you pull it together, it becomes very raw and you work with what you have. The data is the truth. So even if they're negative pieces, we don't call out who it is. We don't call out, so that way it's a group thing. So remember, it's a team effort, right? So there exists these little buckets of negativity perhaps in a team, right? So in these moments, I will usually parking lot and say, oh, we recognize this, something we can improve on and work on, right? But acknowledge it. So just like we teach in core, it's a concern, acknowledge it, but we don't want to blow it up, right? And that's something that you can know that exists. So what I do in these cases is, all right, summarize at the end. We don't need to address it there as a group. Acknowledge that there's different opinions, but working with the leader is where you have to start engaging, say, be aware that these concerns exist. How do we formulate a plan going forward to support you, support the team? And it doesn't matter who said it. At the very end, if you're in it for the team, you want to make sure collectively that they're all together. So that's usually how I would address it offline. Acknowledge it, right? So again, use the framework we've taught. Look at them as elements, right? So any negative thing is a concern. Could be a challenge or problem as well. How do you manage it? Well, acknowledge it upfront, but then we'll bucket it and work with the leaders afterwards to get through it. Does that answer your question? This one? I will get back to you on the measurement success.
Oh, yes, it does. Thank you. Thanks, Lisa.
Also. All right.
Hi, Lisa. Can I quickly add on to this and raise a question?
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing this framework. It's very valuable. Before you step into a team effort, into a team meeting, in whatever context, will you be having one-on-ones with each team member beforehand? Or will you be taking it up as a team directly and only having one-on-ones with the leader or with the executive beforehand?
Me personally, depends. So my question back to you is, if you do it one-on-one, what is the outcome you're looking for? If you do it without the one-on-one, what is the outcome you're looking for? So there needs to be an intention behind every action. so I'm going to just throw that back to you, right? So some people choose to, but there needs to be an intention. For me personally, I don't. I go in blind without being already, I guess you could say, influenced by certain lenses. So if it's a team, we come as a team, right? And that's me personally. So I don't want to dictate what's right or wrong at this point, but this is how I manage it personally. Does that answer your
Okay,
question?
thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Yes.
All right.
thank you.
There's a raised hand. I'm sorry I can't pronounce your name. Mabeth
Mbithe.
Wema?
Yes,
Yes.
Mbithe. Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm unable to put on my camera. Kindly bear with me. All right. So thank you so much for the presentation. My question is just to follow up on what Ines has questioned, because what you're describing sounds like it's a lot. So typically, is this a one-off engagement? Is it a 6-month engagement? It does sound like it's quite overwhelming. Perhaps I'm also a novice in this because I'm just starting off on the coaching session. So I just wanted to get a sense of how do you manage it from a process perspective? Do you go in and then have outcomes and then do it for like 6-7 months, or how does it generally work?
So I'm gonna, okay, the people who know me as facilitators will know I always answer a question with a question. So my question back is, how long does change take to show up?
7 years.
Okay, maybe, right? So these things usually aren't short term.
Okay.
Business outcomes are short term. You can work with the what situation. Short term, half a year plan, great. You want NOP by this time, great. But behaviors are not short term gains.
Okay.
And so how you work really up with the leaders, right? And your sponsor and your client about, all right, how do you want to see the change? Back to, so now I think I'm in a great position to answer Judy's question, to ask the leaders, how do we know we're doing it right? If we're going to go through this engagement, what will be different? How will people show up different? So you will have your business outcomes, and I know everyone wants a business outcome. Return on investment, how much, engagement, surveys, great. But beyond that, what behaviors will be different, right? And those are the questions you need the leaders or your sponsor or client to be answering. How will people show up differently? How will they work with each other differently? And how will you show up differently, right? Leader, I'm not doing it only for your team. You're part of the team. You're part of the organization. And that's where you as a coach need to manage the client in that way as well.
Thank you so much. Just a brief question, a follow-up to that. So if you're working with the leaders, do you prompt the leaders and identify the problem, or do the leaders come to you? How do you know, or how do you sort of reflect that there's possibly a problem that you could be able to help them solve?
How does a client come to you with a coaching conversation, with a topic? How do we open a conversation for a client? Same way, apply the same. So all the principles that we're teaching, the frames, take it in the same light, right? Say, what's going on, leader? They'll tell you situation. Allow them to reflect, right? Encourage, so use the tools that we're teaching. Give them the space, create space with them, go into the next layer, right? What are they desiring? What's their expression of desire? Now you're getting it, right? So as you peel back, so how do you use a transformative coaching conversation one-to-one with the leader to start peeling back what it is they want then for the team? Does that answer your question?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Lisa.
You guys have the tools. I just want to say, all those who are here who've done the core, you have it. It's just how you translate it in a different environment. That's all I'm offering, right? It's a possibility that the translation exists and it's possible. Hey, Raj. You have your hand raised.
Yeah, hi Lisa. I'm from Sri Lanka. I have a question about the sustainability or the stickiness. Because that's one stress kind of a challenge. Some of my assignments I have faced, I think even in the future it will be. So what strategies you would use to ensure there's sustainable change, especially in terms of behavior in organizations as teams and working as teams?
Have you done our core, Raj?
Sorry, no. I have done my initial PCC level training. That's
Okay,
all.
cool. Okay, no worries. So see, I keep going back to the framework and how it's so applicable, right? Like the point is, when we're trying to create generative change in our clients, what we want to do, same thing, create generative change that they're thinking around, all right, how are you going to make it stick for your team? So rather than how are you going to make it stick for you, how are you going to be honoring this going forward as a leader? How are you going to show up going forward for your teams to allow them to be like that as well? So what we're doing now is teaching the leader to coach their teams with the same thinking around how do you want to show up as a leader to allow them to come forward in change. And I know I'm not answering your question directly, Raj, because it's a method, right? There's a methodology about going in, and it's really prompting the leader to take up that leadership role in asking for change in their team.
Okay, thank you.
I have a few more slides coming up that will hopefully try to prompt that. But it's a series of work, right? It doesn't happen over one question. That's the thing. Change, we know as, one-to-one, change doesn't happen over one conversation. It's over a series of conversations. So it's the same thing over a series of conversations, teamwork, that this will slowly evolve. And I know I did, yeah, that's how I would answer it, Raj. Does that kind of guide you to the direction, give you some direction?
Yeah, thank you.
Great. I'll take one more, Hannah, and then I'll finish the last slides and then we can close. Yeah, Hannah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So my question would be, so you just mentioned, right, you talk to the leader and then they have their expression of desire and then you figure out what it is that they want to do or achieve. What if there's a discrepancy between what the leader wants and what the team wants? Because at some point it's going to go, is that something that the leader says, this is what I want for my team, but what if that's not in line with what the team wants and how they see they should,
right.
In what
so
direction?
Have you done our core 2?
Yes.
Okay, great. So what checkpoint is that kind of focusing on now? When you're feeling, right, what we need to do is uncover the gap then, right?
Between,
so,
okay.
Right, so because it's a system, and this is where I say it gets really complex. Fine, you have a focus, the focus for whatever it is you need. There's a focus of the team, but then therein exists some gap. So the role is really to uncover the gap transparently between as a team. And you want to be super open about the process, about how we go about it. And again, there's ways to facilitate. So today's not really a facilitation course, but that's in essence, the principle behind it is we want to uncover the gap so that everyone can see it and mirror back that gap to the whole team.
Okay, great. Yep, thank you.
You're welcome. And the facilitation is a different story. We won't cover that today, but the principle more or less exists. So that's the question there. Okay, so I'm going to close off. I know we have coming to time. And we will share the slides. If you do want to use the framework, of course, take it and customize it. So as we're going to close this, the key questions for me that I always go with is, fine, as an individual leader, what is emerging for you? What will you do with this learning? And we've taught this as part of the core. Extend it, right? How will this change? How will this change show up? Sorry, how will this change show up for you as a leader for your team? Or how will you show up? How will this change show up for you in the team? And how will this change show up for you as a leader in your organization? So I have some grammar there. So how will you show up as a leader for your organization now with this change? How will you show up now as a leader for your team with this change? So just keep in mind that lens, me, my team, my organization. And that's something that you can always ask. You should ask actually in organizational settings. And my takeaways in learning as you move forward on this and embark on this journey for yourself is, first of all, an organization is super complex. You have to prioritize what you're going after. You cannot simply do everything that the leader wants. And that's where, for me, my priority is, let's focus on what's positive and possible. My priority is to focus on change behaviors. You can take a totally different lens depending on who you are and where you are in your growth and what the team wants. Change that sticks starts organically. And to Raj's point, this is where as leaders, we need to go right to the lowest level. And that's where as leaders, you want to be pushing that to the lowest level. Organic is the only way the change will stick. We know change doesn't work top down, right? I'm in an organization that's trying that. And talk about how success feels like. People are engaged through feeling, right? And that's a discussion you want to be very open about. Fine, how does success look like? And a lot of people usually go to measurements, business metrics, blah, 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 blah. But how does it feel like fundamentally is getting to the piece of behaviors. So those are just some thought pieces that I want to share from experience as we close. So I do see one more question. Essential piece of transparency, openness in the team. What happens if the leader is not cultivated with the team or is not culture in the organization? Okay, tough question. In this case, I really get asked the question who the sponsor is right now, right? If the sponsor is the leader or the sponsor is their leader, that's what you need to work with the sponsor lens. But what you want to be is not taking sides. You want to be transparent on uncovering the gap. So one of the gaps, right, as you're working through this is, leader maybe has this view. Other people have this view. Where's the incoherence? What's the gap, right? That's what you want to be transparently. So remember, as a coach, we need to be outside of the bottle. You need to be outside of your client's bottle, the team bottle, right? And just show, I'm seeing inconsistencies. I'm seeing different opinions. How do you guys see that? Where do you want to go with this? What do you want to do with these inconsistencies? Do you want to close them? Do you want to narrow them? What do you want to do? What do you, team, client, what do you want to do? Right? That's stepping out as a client, as the coach. Same thing here. If you're seeing something that's not connected, bullet it back, mirror it back, what you're seeing. Whether it's not right, wrong, it's not our place to judge, right? It's our place to mirror back what's happening in the team. So I'm conscious we overran for 2 minutes and I'm very sorry, but thank you everyone for today. I will stay behind if there's any other questions, but just want to say, love your attendance. Keep joining. We have another 2 days live demo happening. There's 2 sessions tomorrow. And join us for the rest of the week and we will see you.